Welcome to our second installment here of 5 Minutes with Cap. I'm here with CEO and President of WSIA, Brady Kelley. Hey, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so before we get into it, tell us what some of the stats are here of this conference. How many people so far? What's it up from?
Yeah. So right now we've got 8,268 people registered. And we've got a line at the on-site reg desk, so we'll have a few more than that. That's up from 7,655 last year and 6,000 the year prior, so 6,500 the year prior.
What was, before like NAPSLO and AMGA merged together, what was the NAPSLO conference? How many people were going to that?
There were, I want to say the last NAPSLO conference, maybe 4,900.
It's double.
Oh, yeah.
Just about, yeah.
At AMGA, I'd be guessing, but I want to say 1,500 to 1,800 at their annual meeting. And a lot of those people were the same. So when we cross-referenced who went to that event, the NAPSLO event, a lot of overlap. So, this is a lot of growth. But that's tracking where the market's been growing. So,
what have you been surprised by in terms of how or why it's grown so much?
How long it's sustained, maybe, I would say. We tend to, or historically, I would say, tend to look at, the hard, soft market cycle kind of happening relatively quickly.
Right.
And that's just not been the case here. I think a lot of our leaders would say maybe this isn't, the normal hard, soft market cycle. I think there's just a lot of growth in this market because of the demand we've seen for specialty solutions.
So you've got, over 8,000 people this year. Assuming you had a target, what was the...
we had a budget.
You have a budget. Okay.
Yeah.
But what was this all you hoped for? What was, how many people do you think this could still get to?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say this. We do have a budget for it. I don't have a target. I would say our goal is not to grow this larger and larger and larger all the time. It's great that it has been. Our target is to make sure that people that are here are getting exactly what they need while they're here.
Sure.
And so that doesn't necessarily need to be bigger to accommodate that, obviously. But it's tracking the growth in the market. How big could it get?
Yeah.
And we project as a team, this place could accommodate up to 10,000. Again, these properties, next door neighbors, co-owned.
Sure.
There's a lot of synergy between the two of them. We've got the Hilton, 1,000 rooms at the Hilton starting next year.
You got shuttle buses going around.
We have 17 hotels total. And the shuttles are hopping today. They're busier. I think that was an ad last year. They're really busy this year, which means people are moving around, and that's great. Plus, we've got, if you remember, in 2021, when we were back post-pandemic, remember we tinted that back lot? We could do that again.
Sure.
And put a ballroom out there. So I think we've got room to grow here. But that's not necessarily our target or our goal. It's wonderful that it's growing. But again, our mission is to serve those that are here, not to pack them in.
San Diego's been a popular location. Is it always going to be in San Diego?
I wouldn't say always, but we're here through 2030. We're contracted through 2030. We've been talking to the hotels about dates beyond that. We've probably got some options on 31 to 35, which sounds crazy to think about.
Yeah.
But we'll probably pull the trigger on some of those as we need to. I don't see us booking that far out in the same place, just because this could grow. Beyond what we think could happen here. So we got to think about that.
How many cities are equipped to do something like this?
Very few. Very few. Again, I think what people don't understand, you think about large cities, there are large hotels everywhere.
Right.
These are really large hotels, though. To have 1,625 rooms this year in this property, 1,300 next door, you don't see that very often. There are convention cities that have a lot of properties. You're going to be spread amongst not just two mains, it'd be more than that in a lot of places. We've looked at other cities, and even in Chicago, where you've got big events, big conventions, you got 5 hotels with these kind of events within them. So,
no, it's great.
Very few cities can accommodate. I should say this: outside of being in a convention center, which we don't want to be in. I mean,
Sure.
this convention center down the path is huge,
Gigantic.
but it'd be tough to
Right.
have this kind of an event in that setting, we think. So,
Last question, what's next for WSIA? What's on the agenda?
what's next? Beyond the events that we support, the education programs that we do, there's a lot going on from a legislative and regulatory standpoint. If you haven't seen it, that ledge update we sent, 3 weeks ago maybe, there were 29, 30 states this year that took some level of action with surplus lines, either regulation changes or law changes. So always a lot going on there. And we've got some states that are making it a little bit more difficult to do wholesale specialty business there.
Sure.
I mean, Florida, the 90-day post-repair legislation that says you can't cancel or non-renew a risk until after that's been fully repaired. They made that specifically applicable to our market this year
Right.
for the first time ever. And you've got a state where the standard markets are already struggling to provide cover.
Yeah.
We're the supplement to that, and now it's harder for our market too. So I just think there are states like that where the environment's getting harder. We've got more work to do there. I think they know that, and the regulators know that, and are open to working with us on that. But I would say those kind of things are next for us.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks for the time.
Thank you for having
Thanks
me.
for tuning in. I'm here with Brenda Austenfeld, president of RT Specialty, CEO of National Property at RT Specialty, and also the chair of WSIA. Thanks for joining us.
You bet. Thank you for having me.
When you look at your tenure as the chair of WSIA, what were some of the challenges?
Well, that as we grow and expand throughout our entire industry, a lot of it's continuing with the success that we've all been able to experience and really relate to over the last 5, 10, 20 years. I've been doing this for a long time, and it's really fun to be literally on the front row.
With Farhin Lilywala, section editor for distribution and specialty at Insurance Insider. Thanks for joining us.
Of course, happy to be here.
So when you go to a conference like this, what are you looking to accomplish?
So the way that we usually look at WSIA is to meet as many people as we can. I mean, there's no other forum like a conference where you can meet so many people in such a short amount of time in person.
Sure.
And, just like the insurance industry believes, the journalism industry also believes that it's all about relationships, and it's all about making that connection, because without our sources, we're nothing.
How much of the work is, compiling background on ideas or thoughts that you're working on versus actively breaking news?
Well, I like to tell our reporters that 80% of your job is talking to people. The other 20% is writing.
Okay. And is that the same type of thing at a conference like this? Or, are you going around and looking for stuff, or?
We've done a couple of on the record interviews, and we scheduled those.
Sure.
But other than that, we're doing more of talking to people on background situation and getting a feel for what they're hearing at the conference and what they're focused on and stuff like that.
Are people nervous to meet with you?
Sometimes. I think there's a misconception that they're always going to be on camera, and I'm like, no, it's okay. So we do have to kind of allay the fears. We're no, if we say it's on background, it's going to be on background. It's not attributable to you or to to the company, and we stand by that.
Have you ever gotten in trouble with someone in terms of saying things that they thought were unfair, or saying things that maybe they didn't want out in public?
Yeah, I will say everyone always has opinions, but we try to be very clear about what we're publishing.
Sure.
So anytime we publish something, we're always reaching out for comment.
Sure.
So that being said, we also do protect our sources. So if there's any time that there is information that we're we know this will be traced back to our source, we have to be very sensitive with it. We have to be very careful with it.
Have you ever gotten news that was too big?
I wouldn't say too big as an organization necessarily, but as a person, yeah, I would say that I refer to my editors. I have to consult with them. I'm like, okay, this could be a really big story. How do we handle this? What's the best practice? And make sure we cover all our bases. Reach out for comment to all the parties that we need to, kind of thing. So, yeah.
Do you ever have people, you have the information and then stuff gets shut down?
Yeah, all the time. All the time. It happens. It's part of the job. And sometimes, we'll have those conversations with companies. Usually when it happens, it's there's a question of whether we're telling the right story, whether we're telling the accurate story. And then that's when there's a discussion.
Cool. Do you enjoy going to this conference? Or is it kind of a necessary evil? Would you rather be on the phone doing random stuff in different cities?
No, I mean, of course it has its challenges. We all call it speed dating for a reason,
Sure.
And it is tiring. But I enjoy conferences. I think if you do a conference right, you leave feeling very productive and like you've done a good job.
What's the most interesting thing you've heard so far over the last couple of days?
I mean, there's been a lot of conversations on casualty and that space. It's very interesting to see the different kind of perspectives of where carriers may think, that space is headed, whereas brokers have a different opinion on where it might be headed. There are many different views on the market in general and whether they expect a softening to come, whether it's more of just a moderation. I think the most interesting part for me has been to hear all those different perspectives.
That everyone has a different take.
Yeah, because you don't want to hear the same thing again and again. You want to hear, it's great to know that we're on the right track,
right.
But then at the same time, it's great to see that, okay, like here's a nuance that you didn't think about, or here's the dynamic that you should think about, kind of thing.
Great. Oh, interesting. Hey, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Here with Gina Jones, Vice President and Director of Environmental Business at Burns & Wilcox. You are this is 3 years in a row.
3, yes.
You must be pleased.
I am. I am pleased, yes.
So what's new?
Just living the dream here at WSIA, right? Nothing's really new.
No?
No.
All right, come on. It looks like you had a couple of notes here about.
I do. I have all my notes right here.
What's interesting in the environmental market right now?
It's interesting because every year you and I have talked and it's been like, gosh, things are going great. We have all kinds of
Yeah,
limits.
it's competitive. It keeps getting more and more competitive.
Right.
Sounds like the music has come on. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
This year's a little bit different, right? I think things have kind of caught up in the environmental world. What we're seeing now, and it's making our life so difficult. Carriers are pulling back on limits. So if they were offering 10 million, they're now offering 5. If they were offering 5, they're offering 3.
Do you think environmental is collateral damage there, or is it because there's been claims?
I think that everybody's worried about the nuclear verdicts, right? And of course, the third-party litigation that's going on. So I think that they're all just tightening up on all of this. So, as a broker, our lives are a little bit more difficult, where I can't just put together a $10 million deal. I have to start putting together towers, and we have renewals that are coming out that they're non-renewing excess limits. And, it's definitely been a struggle this past year, and I see it just continuing through 2025.
Is it across the board, or is it more auto-focused?
Interesting, because I would say that it definitely has an auto swing.
Yeah.
But there are carriers that have actually completely pulled out of excess if there's casualty at all.
Oh.
So that becomes a problem, right? Because they have a 1-2 primary. They're not offering the excess limits because they're getting out of casualty. And a lot of carriers don't want to sit excess of a 1-2. So now I have to replace the entire account. So there's a lot of work that's going on, a lot of movement.
Are you seeing more business coming into the wholesale channel now?
We are, which is a great thing. I mean, submissions are up, everything is up. It's just, we are having to work really hard on making sure we layer limits and getting the right carriers in place. We're also having carriers that are reanalyzing their entire book and pulling off of a lot of things. So definitely a different year from you and I spoke last year.
That's interesting. Are you surprised by it?
I am, and
You
I
are.
don't like it. I am surprised by it because, environmental historically is pretty profitable.
Right.
Everybody wants to get in on it because it is profitable, but I think those nuclear verdicts that in general are happening are frightening most carriers, and they're just really pulling back on everything.
So you said, you see this going on into next year.
I do.
What's gonna stem it?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think
No.
this is our new normal.
Interesting. So you're
lower
finding,
limits.
and you're finding, so when you're putting together a $10 million tower, you're needing 3-4 markets?
At least 2, and depending on the account, maybe 3, but definitely 2. There are some still carriers out there who are willing to give the full 10 million.
Right.
But it's a challenge.
Interesting.
It's a challenge.
What was the point that you saw it start to change?
This summer, I started hearing about it from other wholesalers, and I'm like, no, it's not affecting us. It's fine.
Interesting.
And then all of a sudden, we started getting those same non-renewals and those same conversations, and so it really started happening this summer.
Interesting.
And then when I drilled down and started asking the carriers, it's like, your loss is in the first, layer. So what are we doing here? And the answer has unanimously been the nuclear verdict. Plaintiff attorneys are literally just coming out and saying, what are your policy limits? Hand over the check. So they think that they're reducing their exposure by bringing it from 10 to 5 or 5 to 2. And that's where we're at.
So we've worked with you all for a couple of years. Why, from your view, what's made the CapSpecialty partnership work?
And that's a really good question. I definitely think trust. We trust each other and value. This is a relationship business. I think insurance in general is a relationship business. And that's so important. That's why we're here, right? Developing those relationships and continuing. But I think mostly because of the trust that we have, my team has, along with your team, with each other.
Yeah, great. How many people did you bring out to the conference?
Burns and Wilcox brought in 150. My team, with the environmental and energy team, we have 6 of us.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Great. Thanks. All right. I've got Jen Pioni, our head of healthcare, and James McNitt, the healthcare practice leader at RPS. Both of you, thanks for joining.
Thank you.
All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about the healthcare business this afternoon. First off, we continue to see nuclear verdicts, claims inflation, social inflation, whatever you want to call it in healthcare. How much of a challenge has this been as you try to broker the business?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's been a real challenge. We're seeing a lot of capacity management from our carriers, and that started several years ago, but there was a couple years where they had the intent to reduce limits, but didn't really get it across the goal line because it wasn't enough to get the deal done, to the point where now we are seeing true capacity management from some of our carriers, where they're cutting from 25 to 15 to 10 to sometimes 5s. I'm building a couple $100 million towers today, and we are stacking.
Wait a
5s.
second. The thing of carriers wanted to do it, but they didn't do it. How does that work?
Yeah, I might get myself in trouble with this comment, but we are still seeing, and this still exists today in some other lines of healthcare, where there's a leading indicator from a carrier saying, this year we're going to do this, we're going to reduce these terms and conditions, and then realizing that they may not win the account that year. If they make this slight subtle change to coverage, they say, all right, one more year, we'll throw that in still. So there's still a lot of that behavior today that we're seeing.
What do you see as as a head of healthcare, looking at a bunch of different types of lines, whether they're medical malpractice only, medical malpractice that brings a bunch of casualty involved with it? How do you think about claims inflation and nuclear verdicts?
It's definitely a challenge, especially in a lot of the venues that we operate in. We look at venues, but nowadays it seems like every venue is a bad venue. So to combat that, we really just need to, as James said, shorten limits. So look at primary only, where previously we may have done 1 plus a 10 or 1 plus a 5. Certain parts of the business are harder than other parts, so we can get away with it more in the human service space versus potentially the miscellaneous medical space. But that's really the only way to manage it, is you don't know when it's going to come, so it's really, you got to shorten your book.
And do you feel like now, James, as the broker, you could sell that, or are we still dealing with people who haven't noted their leading indicators?
Yeah, that's a great question. The more you get ahead of it, the easier that message is to deliver. And I've seen the broker community support their carriers with this kind of challenges, because we've seen the claims. We see the severity of these claims, and especially starting in the hospital and academic medical center space, you're seeing verdicts that are breaking records every single year. So as Jen said, there is no good state anymore. There's no safe space, and the claims are across the board. And unfortunately, with a lot of these large systems, it's not if, it's when those large claims come through.
You know, it used to be that healthcare was about med-mal and just med-mal. More and more, you're seeing some casualty perils really getting the headlines. How does that complicate the selling the coverage or trying to find the right homes for businesses?
It's interesting, as we have seen other parts of the casualty space have their own increased severity over the years. We're seeing certain classes in the gray area try to make their way into healthcare, because the healthcare marketplace right now is in a somewhat of an softening space that I can't really defend today, but that's the carrier behavior is one of softness. And so certain placements that might be in that gray area space, for example, independent living facilities that have pull cords. It's kind of a habitational risk, but there is a pull cord component to it, which is medical, and there is medical staff on site. And so we see placements in the gray area coming over to the healthcare space as a result.
And they could get a better deal in the healthcare than they can in the habitation.
If they have a great broker, they just might. Yeah.
You've talked about HNOA being a really turning into a real challenge, in that the pricing has really turned out to be inadequate. Why is that?
Yeah, that's really the canary in the coal mine for a lot of our healthcare placements, where several years ago, when HNO was being included or thrown in for basically $0 of premium and with very limited underwriting information, the claims are popping up on these claim-made forms 2 to 3 to 4 years later. And so the claims dollars today that are being paid out on a balance sheet are being attributed to what was collected 4 years ago, which was $0. And so very tough to make a margin when having claims like that pop up.
Jen, how does that happen? I mean, how does it happen where the pricing is so off?
Yeah, I think that a lot of carriers just didn't anticipate what is coming today. So there's some loosening in regulations from a state perspective in terms of, for whether loading and unloading, and whether going to and from work can be attributed to an HNOA claim versus just a personal auto claim. So I think that the HNOA is picking up more than they thought that it would 4 or 5 years ago. So they weren't seeing the losses. A lot of carriers were just throwing it in to be able to win the business in a softened time. Now everyone's realizing that it's a much larger exposure than they expected. So there are a lot of carriers that are trying to correct for it, but there's still room to go.
Sure. You were kind of talking about it a little bit with the pull cord risk, but with some of these organizations, that are big, complicated organizations, inevitably you have underwriters that can turn into, solution providers, creative, whatever euphemism you want to use. I mean, how do you navigate that as a broker, where obviously you want to do right by the client today, but you also want to do right by them when the claim comes in?
You do. The healthcare form is broad. We're fortunate to have carrier partners like CapSpecialty that have forms that are intended to cover all of the exposures that come with these healthcare risks. But at the end of the day, we are covering bodily injury as a result of medical negligence. That's the leading coverage form for these PL forms. And so when we get these GL heavy risks, we lean on our carrier partners to say that's got too much GL, that belongs in a habitational. And at RPS, I oftentimes bring in my casualty brokers, my counterparts, to say, guys, we're going to go to the marketplace concurrently, because let's see what we can get on the healthcare side for the healthcare piece, the pull cords, for example. Let's just carve out that little piece, and then the rest of the habitational placement, that heavy GL, should belong with a carrier that's a better fit for that.
So you were talking a little bit about kind of generally a soft market. What's your view on what's going on in the hospital business, nursing facilities?
Yeah, healthcare in general has seen some challenges in the hospital space, and I'm Pollyannish about that change because I believe that the hospital space is often a leading indicator. So challenges in the hospital space will likely lead to challenges in some of the other spaces. Today in the senior care space, and specifically the large allied healthcare space, I like to quote Alan Greenspan from 1996 when he was referring to the dot-com bubble as irrational exuberance.
Okay.
And right now we're seeing a lot of carriers behave with irrational exuberance where they are
In allied health.
in allied health and senior care where they're quoting deals that perhaps they might be getting a little bit competitive on, in my opinion, is because they're looking a little bit too short-sighted at the loss trends from 2020, 2021, and 2022. Courts were closed, hasn't reopened, development's still on its way, and so we have a lot of risks today where it's like, oh, the past 3 years, this thing looks great. Of course it does. Nothing's happened yet. So we're seeing some behavior that, in my opinion, does not necessarily correlate with future expected profitability challenges.
Do you think it's, or not do you think, is it price or is it terms and conditions too?
Yes, it's everything. Price is going to continue to win the day, but we are still getting terms and conditions that we maybe shouldn't be as well. You mentioned hard non-known auto earlier. We do have carriers saying this year we're going to exclude it, we're not going to include it. When they find out they might lose the deal, and they're like, okay, we'll do it for one more year. So there's an intent to reduce terms and conditions, but we're still able to get them at the end of the day.
All right, good. Well, hey, this was great. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Kevin Doyle, CEO of RPS. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be the first one and first olive out of the jar for you.
Very, very exciting. So you got the new CEO job January 1st, 2024. Congratulations with that. What's been the biggest challenge so far?
Well, I think it's been exciting because, frankly, just spending time with our team, with clients, with carriers, there's a lot of opportunity in the space, and I think we'll continue to see a lot of opportunity in the space. So as you look at that, there's obviously challenges that come with that. And so the exciting thing for us is that we have a phenomenal team ready to address some of those challenges. So I'm sure we'll spend time at WSIA talking to various trading partners of ours of how do we address certain challenges, and what can we do collectively as an industry. So I'm excited about that, and I'm excited about the opportunities.
What's one that, I'm sure there's more than one, but what's one that kind of comes to the top of the mind of, hey, we need to be talking about this over the next couple of days?
Yeah, I think, I don't know that there's anything specifically here in terms of things that we need to address and solve over the next few days. But I think as we start to think through whether they're internal challenges, whether they're external challenges, I think probably one of the bigger things that, again, we're not going to solve here is in the casualty space, some of the challenges that you see with nuclear verdicts, that you see with litigation funding, just those two alone, we're not going to solve over the next few days, but certainly opportunities to foster more discussion around what we can do in those spaces collectively to address opportunities that face our industry.
You talked about it as being, or someone wrote on your website about it being puzzling and predictably unpredictable in terms of the casualty market. Why those words, or what makes it so tricky?
Yeah, I think if you look at some of the challenges facing that market, it will be very interesting to look at reinsurance renewals on 1/1 and the impact that has on 2025. But you start to think about litigation funding, nuclear verdicts, and then you start to think through regulatory changes, and the world's becoming more complex. And the ability to adapt to that, not adapt to it, is certainly something that we have the opportunity as an industry to address, but more importantly, solve problems for our collective clients that ultimately can help mitigate some of the challenges that are out there. But
do you think that the problems are tending toward the larger types of organizations? Is the small business has kind of been a little bit more under the radar in terms of the unpredictableness?
No, I think it's almost all encompassing. I mean, you could, as an example, you take a small trucking company.
Sure.
They're faced with a lot of the same risks that business that has 500 power units does for the one that has two. And so over the road exposure, they have the same exposure and challenges. Now their insurance buying strategy may be a little bit different.
Sure.
But there's still the same risk and exposure there. So I don't know that it's a small versus large when we start to think about some of the challenges within the casualty marketplace.
Sure. So you have the new role. You were overseeing the Western region before. How'd you get into insurance? How'd you get into the wholesale business?
Yeah, so I've been in the wholesale business or in a wholesale capacity my whole career.
Yeah.
I spent 2 summers when I was in college interning in the industry.
Oh, where?
And so I interned at Gallagher for 2 summers.
Sure.
And fell in love with the wholesale space because of the amount of opportunities.
Yeah.
And began my career at Artex, which was or is a captive manager and alternative risk kind of financing wholesaler. And it was interesting because working with all of the retail partners that we had, started to see the industry through a unique lens.
Right.
And the ability to look at single parent captives to group captives to ILS type structures and strategies of how do you start to finance some of those risk management programs. And then joining RPS about 6 years ago, it's interesting to start to see all the different strategies and opportunities within primarily the E&S sector. And so when you couple those together and seeing the industry through that lens of the larger risk management programs that are financed differently to smaller accounts in our binding strategy, to larger accounts in our brokerage opportunity, to program business, it's provided a nice backdrop to be able to start to think about the industry and opportunities that exist by having some of that diversification over the years.
Last question, what's next for RPS?
Yeah, there's a lot. I know we don't have all morning to talk about that, and I could because I'm excited. I'm excited about some of those things. But as I think about our business today and some of our growth ambitions, really what you'll see from us is very client-centric and client-focused opportunities. So what can we do to continually be obsessed with driving an outcome for our clients? So let me give you a few examples. Yeah. As we look through and think about how do we provide some type of consultative impact for our clients and their insureds in partnership with our carrier partners, looking at the utilization of data. How do we think about benchmarking and analytics? How do we think about things that for a retail broker, as well as their insured, can drive some of their buying decisions through the utilization of data? How do we think about the ability to bring product to them that addresses a solution that solves a problem that they have today? But most importantly, how do we continue to have some of the best talent in the industry? And so the intellectual capital that we have today and that will continue to develop and grow throughout the organization is one of the things that I'm the most excited about, because there's not a lack of opportunities in this space, and it's our team and our people that go out and execute day in and day out for our clients. So those are, I mean, we could, again, spend all morning on. Those are some of the things that I'm most excited about. And I think most importantly, they drive an impact for our clients. And if we can continue to do that, I know that we'll continue to have success into the future.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks for taking the time.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Welcome back. I'm here with the CEO of Commercial Solutions at CRC, Mike Brennan. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Glad to be here, Adam.
What's Commercial Solutions mean?
That actually just comprises our brokerage business and our binding business at CRC.
So you've been going to this event since it was NAPSLO?
For sure, at least 25 years. So I think that change only happened 6 or 7 years ago. It's changed a lot over those years. It used to be a little bit more of a sort of a carrier wholesaler get together and hang out. And even it's been pretty gradual, but over time I've seen it become far more strategic, far more pointed in the meetings, far more detailed engagement planning, having an expectation that we're going to get takeaways out of these meetings and have plans that come out of them. So, which can be a little less fun, but is actually probably a lot more effective and productive.
What have you been surprised about so far? I mean, I guess we're kind of a day and a half in or a day in.
I honestly surprised maybe by there not being many surprises. Everybody's singing off the exact same song sheet when it comes to the marketplace. Property is what it is. If storms perk up, rates could maybe sort of rebound, whether you think it's in a positive or negative way. But everybody's also stating that casualties definitely in a place where they don't see it getting any easier and probably harder.
What does that mean, easier?
Well, maybe better choice of words is it's beginning to firm again, and will continue to do so.
Are you finding, is there any type of pattern to that? Is it around excess versus primary, bodily, more heavy BI focused stuff?
I think it's bifurcated. I think in primary, it's really about class and pricing. For instance, a lot of carriers struggle to figure out a way to write habitational profitably.
Yeah.
Excess is, I think, a little bit more a trend of the smaller limits, where we saw some shake up there earlier in the year with some bigger chunks being grabbed up by some carriers, but that's already slowing down, in my opinion. And that layer pricing is still robust, and we don't see that going anywhere, going away anytime soon.
Is there any? So we talked about property, casualty. Is there anything of interest in any of the other lines? I mean, obviously, the D&O business is competitive, but
I think, there's two things. From a pricing perspective, I don't see a lot of change across all of what we would call exec pro lines, D&O, E&O, cyber, and so on. I do think the interesting thing is that's the area I think that is most accelerated as respects trying to become more efficient, whether it's online quoting or using APIs for accounts of a certain size. Perhaps they're a little more commoditized. I think there's a lot of activity, sort of in that insurtech realm around those lines of business, perhaps more so than the other two.
Do you think that, is there anything you've been really impressed by?
I mean, not really. I'm impressed by the business all the time. Everybody's evolving.
Sure.
Everybody keeps doing things better. Everybody is trying to be more efficient. I think, going back to how has WSIA changed, or NAPSLO, however you want to refer to it, I think it's parallel with how has the business changed.
Right.
We've become, instead of this kind of market of last resort where you got your buddy who's got some authority to do a deal, to a group of specialized carriers and specialized brokers that really know what they're doing, are very good at understanding the field that they're focused on and delivering a lot of value to clients. And that goes across the board. I mean, we think we do it amazingly at CRC, but I think the business overall should be proud of how we've become so much sharper and so much more professional.
You talk about, placing you first within CRC. How is that different than, other wholesalers talk about putting the customer first? How do you differentiate?
Yeah, I mean that client-centric comment is made. I'm not sure there's anybody who doesn't make it.
Sure.
What are we supposed to be doing things that aren't good for our clients? So I think that's a little bit to your point. Just simply saying your client-centric operation is a little disingenuous, but we think that the way we look at placing you first is across three constituencies, right? So we've got our carrier partners that we feel culturally we care about. We're not here to do things in a way that's going to make you guys suffer in any way. We want to have our interests aligned, but we also want to be the best platform for our own employees, whether that's through technology or tools or exclusives. And then for our retail brokers, we want to be in a situation where we're delivering the things they need, where their agenda is what we're responding to first, as opposed to our own agenda.
Sure.
So, that's sort of placing you first tagline. We use that as a way of trying to, kind of in summation, to show all three of those constituencies that they are our priority, and that's how we're driving the business forward.
What's next for CRC Commercial Solutions?
Well, we just want to keep growing, and we want to keep developing young talent. We've got, I think one of your questions was, how many people do we have here? You had mentioned that before.
Yeah.
We have 560, but over 80 of that 560 are folks in our launch program who are between 1 and 3 years into production.
Oh, wow.
And we've got, not only are they doing meetings and connecting with carriers as you normally would at WSIA, but they're also engaged in curriculum, and we're bringing guest speakers and training and all that kind of thing. We do that because we know they're going to be centralized here, and that's a focus area that we're only going to double down on, is that development of young talent. It's critical. We've seen an impact on our growth by both hiring new brokers and producers and developing them that's significant to our overall revenue growth.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks a lot for the time.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Appreciate it. Thank you. I have Nick Kohal here with me, EVP of ARMR, which is an environmental specialist wholesaler. Nick, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I hope you all have noted the beautiful flowers that have been put in front of us. Thank you, Lynn and Lindsay. A very nice touch. Okay, this is your second WSIA so far.
Correct.
As a specialist wholesaler compared to some of the other much bigger generalist wholesalers, what are kind of your goals for the conference, and just kind of generally, how have you found it? What are the challenges?
Sure. I definitely say the bigger goals that I've had for the conference have been just meeting with our valued partners, having conversations, trying to figure out, what we've been doing really well together over the past couple of months, and kind of looking to set goals for 2025. What can we do rolling into quarter one on both sides? How can we help you guys get more premium out of us? What can you guys do to help us make it easier, or help us with a tougher class or something we're seeing issues with in the marketplace, and just kind of really set those targets for the future?
Sure. I mean, do you find, so there's a lot of discussion about casualty business, and obviously the environmental business has at times, substantial casualty component. How are you seeing that, change behavior, see how people are talking about the business this year? What have been the challenges?
So, I feel like on the environmental side, we were able to get away with not having such a hard market that the general casualty side was seeing. I feel like that's kind of caught up over the past year or two, where we're definitely seeing the environmental pieces on the contracting side with casualty, seeing more rate increases, especially for those risks that aren't as heavy in the environmental services side of it, more of your like GC type guys, trade contractors.
Sure.
We've definitely seen a huge influx in the manufacturing side of things, though. I think the PFAS exclusions, the added pollution exclusions that have been getting thrown onto a lot of those accounts have gotten agents to kind of think twice about not offering environmental,
right?
And being more open to us, coming up with that manufacturer's GL with the environmental placement on that, driving a lot of good success on that side of the business.
And do they find that they're able to just kind of go anywhere for that, or are they having to go to someone? One of the things we were talking about before this started was kind of the need to specialize, or at least the differentiator of specialization.
Definitely.
How does that manifest itself on something like these manufacturers?
So for us, what's been really nice is that we've always tried to position ourselves as a leader in environmental insurance, someone that is thinking 2-3 moves ahead for our agents, really understanding the pulse of the marketplace, what coverages are there, and then what the real exposures are for their clients. We've established that trust pretty securely with our agency partners that we have and the agents we work with. So for a lot of them, when they started to see those exclusions popping up, it really just kind of maybe lit a fire under them a little bit more to reach out to us. And they know they have direct appointments with some dual distribution markets.
Yeah.
A lot of them still choose to come to us because they realize they see 2 or 3 exposures, a year, maybe 4 or 5 exposures a year that have the true need. And they're like, we know enough to be dangerous, but we know we don't want to miss something that opens us up for either, another agent coming in and taking an account away from them, or, even worse, an uncovered claim situation where
Sure.
all of a sudden they tried to do it direct and they realized they missed something they didn't even know to look for.
Do you see that?
We do see that quite a bit. I've had
Quite
a couple
a
of, I've had a handful of instances where I've had agents that have been reaching out and said, yeah, we've had this one direct for a while. We want to move it over to you. And I start reviewing it and I'm like, you're missing a couple of endorsements here that you guys should have, or did you notice this exclusion? And they're almost deer in headlights. No names will be mentioned, but they're like, okay, yeah, maybe we're happy we had you look at this. Probably should have done it sooner. So,
are you seeing? So you talked about the manufacturers. Are you seeing organic new opportunities in the environmental space, or is it just kind of accounts moving around?
We're definitely seeing a good amount of new business stuff coming in. A lot of new first-time buyers, because they've never been on that type of combined form manufacturers form. On them, but for the manufacturers specifically, it's been probably a 50-50 mix. It's been agents that are bringing on new to them, new to us, and then a lot of them where they go, yeah, we've been on the GL with this one for a while. We've never done environmental for them. The kind of we saw, oh, and you don't want environmental, do you? They don't really try and push it, but they're really making that to be, whether it's a monoline environmental placement with it, and they just keep their BOP and the GL together, or they're looking for us to do something on a combined basis.
Pros and cons of being an independent wholesaler here?
I think it's kind of fun. We definitely the underdog, except for, those of us in the industry that are running, the people we run into and we know.
Sure.
I think it's kind of fun because, we're a smaller independent wholesaler, definitely compared to our peers and a lot of the big names that are here.
Sure.
We play on an international platform, though.
I'm here with Tom Parsons, head of digital strategy at Amwins. Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise.
So is this the first conference, the first WSIA conference you've been to?
No, been to a few. I think I've probably been in insurance for about 20 years, the wholesale side for 6-7 years. So I've been coming for the last 6-7 years, yeah.
How has this year been any different than any of the other ones?
It's interesting. I think as we look at the surplus lines market, I guess the idea of this golden age of surplus lines, and we see just a ton more kind of flow of business hitting surplus lines, and conferences such as the WSIA, we're seeing, more attendance and more kind of interest in this space. But I also find that over time, there's been more focus perhaps on like innovation and technology as well, which for a person in my role is incredibly pleasing to see for sure.
Is there a counter to it's not the golden age of E&S?
Well, I think there's different segments performing in subtly different ways. I think it's just that there's a number of segments that have just seen kind of more surplus line solutions being kind of more valuable in the market. And so I think that's probably leading to, the concept of the golden age. But, I think there's areas perhaps, casualty where I think, there's been a bit more pressure, and, maybe with social inflation and I don't know, like finance litigation, it's probably a few bad news stories away from kind of becoming very challenging and, seeing kind of rates harden an awful lot more. But I think the different segments are performing in different ways, but property in particular, it's just been a riot seeing kind of how challenging it's been and the inflow of business, and time will tell whether that flows back or not. I don't know.
So I guess a couple of different questions about, what is the role of digital strategy in Amwins and kind of what are your goals there? But I guess the first question is when you have something like the pressure that you're seeing in casualty, how do you think about that as with the digital strategy? Or is it, how flexible do you need to be? And does any of the challenges in the market, is it at odds with anything that you're trying to do?
It's a good question. I think casualty can be perhaps in certain elements kind of more challenging to provide digital solutions for our retail partners. I think there's just so much nuance, and different areas of the casualty market do look very different. I think we find in particular like cyber liability, we're finding there's just a ton of capacity. We see it more on like an open brokerage basis, where people are kind of pretty sophisticated and quite dialed in on the type of appetite that they're looking for. And, you know, we're selling kind of $1, $2 million, $3 million limits, you know, ranging in premium sizes from $500 to, you know, $25,000 in a straight through instant priced kind of mechanism. So there's definitely certain elements where we're seeing kind of more of a natural tendency or comfort with taking that type of exposure through a straight through process. But I think it's not necessarily prevalent across the whole casualty space. You know, there's just some really difficult, challenging lines where I think most carriers really do want to get their kind of capable underwriters really kind of looking at it a bit deeper, if that makes sense.
You're talking about the cyber business. Do you think that you're going to see size expansion in terms of being able to have technology solutions? Is that kind of the next step, or is the next step kind of going deeper into other products in the small business area?
I think kind of both, really. I think the level of sophistication that technology is able to bring enables us to really look at kind of a wider range of lines of business, but also being able to, within any given line, to be able to just go deeper and potentially kind of offer kind of more challenging solutions, whether it be kind of bigger lines or kind of more complex exposures. So I think it's a slow but sure kind of evolution of using technology in different ways to kind of emulate the best-in-class underwriting capabilities in kind of novel but straight through kind of process solutions. So a bit of both, I think.
Is the wholesaler more focused on the on being faster with the carriers or being faster with the retailers?
I think it's probably a bit of both again. I think we find the time pressures are probably more evident on the retail side, because I guess the retailer working with the insured and the demands on their time to be able to turn things over quicker is probably more prevalent and more kind of like immediate to us. So I think there's an element of that, but I think as we work with the carriers, I think it's more about offering kind of like efficiency and kind of maybe more enhanced like servicing type options. But again, I think everyone across the customer value chain kind of really enjoys kind of touching things less. And I think probably some of the reason is because there are still really difficult, challenging risks.
Sure.
And if we can handle like the easiest stuff quicker, it frees up people's time to work on like the really difficult stuff.
Sure.
And I think that's where everyone wants to spend their time.
So as the head of digital strategy, when you look 5 years from now, how different is the E&S landscape going to look? Or maybe a better question is, how do you hope it's going to look?
Yeah, well, I think the cool thing with E&S, of course, is the freedom of rate and form. So the ability to be able to kind of curate kind of policies that really fit the coverage needs of the insured is a really cool flexibility element. Now, being able to do that in an instant kind of transaction is harder. However, I think there's just an incredible amount of additional sophistication being brought into the technology space as it relates to things like AI in particular. We're finding like generative AI is particularly good at being able to kind of like infer and be able to draw patterns and connections as it relates to things like taking a whole, say, digital footprint of a client and being able to infer how different elements of that footprint relates to various different applications.
What does that mean?
So often with an insured, if they've got any information online for a start, so
Sure.
Of course if they don't, then that makes it difficult. But
Sure.
if they do, we're able to leverage various different online capabilities to understand more information about them. So whether it be kind of social media, LinkedIn, Yelp, or their own website. And the cool thing with that is we can then infer different things that they're doing, which might be challenging for an insured to be able to pick up. And then we can then start passing that through, say, policies and determining
Sure.
things that are excluded or various different elements that need to be thought through. So it really kind of helps kind of the automation, the speed at which, say, underwriters or even a straight through process can offer a really good solution to an insured and the retailer working with them. So I think there's a lot of kind of room for growth in that space. And I think over the next 5 years, I think there's going to be a lot more prevalence of AI kind of offering guidance, I think, for underwriters to be able to be quicker and more effectively guided, almost drawing their attention to things where ordinarily, if they were working quickly, might miss or, you know, might not notice as quickly, whereas AI is going to be able to highlight that a lot quicker, I believe.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks for taking the time.
Pleasure.
Appreciate it. Thanks.